It was a small town where everyone knew each other by name. The streets were quiet most days except for the sound of children playing or the distant hum of old vehicles passing by. In a modest house near the end of the lane lived a family that once knew real happiness. Their home was filled with laughter, the kind that made the walls feel alive. The smell of freshly cooked meals always floated through the windows, and every evening, the sound of music would drift out from the old radio that sat in the living room. Years ago, before life changed, they were just like any other happy family. The eldest son was the light of the house. He was full of energy, always curious, and had dreams bigger than anyone could imagine. He often talked about finding a good job in the city, so he could help his parents and give his younger siblings a better future. His father used to smile proudly and tell him, "You'll do great things one day." His mother would quietly wipe her hands on her apron and nod, trying to hide her tears because she knew how much she would miss him. The day he left was both proud and painful. He hugged his mother tightly before stepping into the small bus that would take him to the city. His younger sister cried, clinging to his arm until their father gently pulled her away. He promised he would write every week, that he would visit soon, and that nothing would ever change. And for a while he kept that promise. Letters came often, sometimes with photos, sometimes just a few lines telling them not to worry. He said city life was hard but exciting. He missed home-cooked food. He missed the quiet nights, and most of all, he missed the sound of his mother's laughter. Then, one day the letters stopped coming. At first, they thought it was just the post being slow. The father said, "Maybe he's busy with work." The mother nodded even though her heart felt uneasy. A week passed, then another. A month turned into 3. The mother tried calling, but the number no longer worked. They wrote letters to his address, but they were returned unopened, marked, "No longer at this location." Fear slowly crept in. The father went to the city himself to look for him. He visited the building where his son used to live, but the landlord said he had moved out months ago. No one knew where he went. The factory where he had worked said he had stopped showing up after an accident on the road, but there were no records, no police reports, nothing. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. The father came home empty-handed. The mother broke down when she saw him walk through the door alone. Their younger children didn't understand what had happened. The house that once echoed with laughter turned painfully quiet. The father tried to be strong for the family, but every night he sat outside staring at the stars, hoping for a sign. The mother spent her evenings beside the old radio, tuning it from one station to another. Sometimes she stayed up till dawn, listening to strangers talk about weather, music, and news, as if hoping one of those voices would suddenly turn into her son's. Years went by and life moved on, though not easily. The father aged faster than he should have. His hair turned gray and deep lines carved into his face. The mother stopped talking about her son altogether. Though his picture still hung in the living room covered in a thin layer of dust, she never allowed anyone to wipe away. The younger siblings grew up watching their parents' silent pain. They avoided bringing up his name because they didn't want to see the sadness in their mother's eyes. One summer afternoon, the family gathered for lunch. It was rare for them all to be home together anymore. The younger brother had started working in town, and the sister was studying to become a teacher. They talked about small things, the weather, their neighbors, the rising cost of food. But beneath their words was a quiet tension, the kind that never truly went away. The empty chair at the table was a constant reminder of the person who should have been there. After lunch, the mother turned on the radio. It had become more than a habit. It was her comfort. The radio had seen the family through years of sorrow and silence. She liked listening to the old programs where people requested songs and shared their stories. It made her feel less alone, as if somewhere out there, other people were missing someone too. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, she would hum the old lullaby she used to sing when her son couldn't sleep. She sang it softly, barely above a whisper, but always with tears in her eyes. It was a simple tune about stars and dreams, one she had made up when he was little. The others pretended not to notice, but every time she sang, they felt a lump in their throat. The father didn't talk much anymore. He worked long hours at a nearby workshop, fixing broken tools and machines. He rarely smiled, though sometimes when he caught his wife listening to the radio late at night, he'd quietly place a shawl over her shoulders before heading to bed. They didn't talk about their loss, but both of them carried it in everything they did. The years blurred together. Seasons changed and neighbors moved in and out. People stopped asking about their missing son because they thought it was too painful to bring up. The younger children built lives of their own, but they always returned home on weekends, knowing how much it meant to their parents, and still, the mother listened to the radio. One rainy night, she sat in her usual chair near the window. The rain fell in steady drops and thunder rolled in the distance. She had finished her chores and made tea for her husband, who had already gone to bed. The radio was playing an old tune, the kind that reminded her of her son's childhood. She listened quietly, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. The lights flickered for a moment and she adjusted the dial to clear the static. Then she heard something strange. It was a man's voice, calm and uncertain, speaking through the radio. It wasn't part of a song or an advertisement. The man was telling his story. He said he had been in an accident many years ago and had lost all memory of who he was. He didn't remember his name, his family, or where he came from. The only things he could recall were small fragments: a yellow house near a field, a father who fixed machines, a younger sister who loved to draw, and a mother who used to sing a lullaby about stars. The cup slipped from the mother's hand and shattered on the floor. She froze, her heart pounding. For a moment she thought she was imagining things. She turned up the volume, leaning closer. The announcer continued reading the message, saying the man hoped someone listening might recognize the story and reach out to the radio station. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered her son's name. Her husband came rushing out of the bedroom, asking what was wrong. She pointed at the radio, unable to speak. He listened, his face pale as the message played again. The voice was not their son's, but the story, every detail belonged to them. The mother trembled, clutching the edge of the table. The younger children, awakened by the noise, came running to see what had happened. When the message ended, silence filled the room. The only sound was the rain hitting the roof. For the first time in years, they all looked at each other with something that had been missing: hope. The father turned off the stove where the tea was still boiling, then sat beside his wife. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, he said quietly, "We'll find out who sent that message." She nodded, still shaking. That night, no one slept. They replayed the moment in their minds over and over again. Could it really be him? Was it possible after all these years? The mother stayed awake until dawn, staring at the radio, as if afraid it might suddenly speak again. The next morning, she held the same photo she'd kept for years, the one where her son stood in front of the yellow house, smiling, the sun behind him. For the first time in a long time, the smile didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The morning after that strange radio message, the house felt alive again in a way it hadn't for years. The family sat around the kitchen table, cups of tea untouched, their faces pale with disbelief and hope. The mother held the photograph in her trembling hands. She couldn't take her eyes off it. The father stared at the radio as if it were some kind of doorway that had suddenly opened to the past. The rain had stopped, but outside the world still looked quiet and gray. The mother finally spoke, her voice shaky but determined. "We need to call that radio station," she said. The father nodded, though he seemed unsure of what to say if someone actually answered. The younger brother searched online for the station's contact number. His fingers shook as he typed. When he found it, he handed the phone to his father. It rang only once before a calm voice picked up. The father's voice cracked as he explained why he was calling, telling them about the message they had heard the night before. The person on the other end listened carefully. After a long pause, the voice said, "Sir, we've had many callers this morning saying the same thing. But your story, it matches too closely to what he described. Can you come to the station?" The family exchanged glances. The father agreed instantly. He hung up the phone and looked at his wife. "They want us to go there," he said softly. The drive to the city felt longer than ever. The road seemed endless, winding through fields and small villages. The father kept his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind replaying every moment of the past. The goodbye at the bus stop, the letters, the silence. The mother sat beside him, holding the photograph in her lap. Every few minutes she looked out the window, whispering quiet prayers. The younger siblings sat in the back seat, nervous and hopeful. No one spoke much. The air inside the car was thick with emotion. When they reached the city, they were guided into a tall building with a sign that read, the radio station's name. Inside, everything felt unfamiliar. Bright lights, people talking quickly, phones ringing. The family waited on a small couch while a young producer came to meet them. He was kind and gentle, sensing their anxiety. He explained that the man who sent the message had reached out a week ago. He had told them he was trying to find his family. He remembered only fragments of his childhood: a yellow house, the smell of jasmine in the air, a father who worked with machines, a sister who loved to paint, and a mother who sang about stars when he couldn't sleep. The producer said they had decided to broadcast his message in hopes someone might recognize the story. When the mother heard that, she covered her face and began to cry softly. The father took her hand and held it tight. The producer looked moved, unsure of what to say. "We don't want to give false hope," he said gently, "but there's a chance." He's been waiting for someone to respond. The family stayed at the station for a few hours, answering questions. The staff asked for old photos and any details that could help confirm the connection. The mother shared the story of her son's disappearance, how the letters stopped, and how they had searched for years with no luck. Everyone listened in silence. There was something in her voice, raw and real, that made the room quiet. Before leaving, the producer promised to contact them soon. "We just need to make sure," he said, "but please keep your phone nearby." The family returned home that evening with hearts full of mixed emotions: hope, fear, and confusion. The mother kept glancing at her phone every few minutes, afraid she might miss a call. The father stayed quiet, lost in thought. Even the younger ones, who usually filled the house with chatter, sat quietly by the radio as if waiting for it to speak again. Days passed. The sun rose and set, but time moved slowly for them. Every morning, the mother turned on the radio the moment she woke up. Every night, she kept it on low while she cooked, hoping to hear another clue. Neighbors began to notice something different. They saw the family smiling again, even if just a little. Some stopped by to ask if the news was true. Others offered prayers and encouragement. One afternoon, the mother received a call. Her hands shook so badly that she almost dropped the phone. It was the same producer. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we spoke to the man again. He remembers more now. He mentioned a field near your house where he used to play, and a small wooden bridge near a pond. Does that sound familiar?" The mother gasped. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "That's behind our house." There was a pause. Then the producer said, "We think it might be him, but we'll need to arrange a meeting somewhere safe and quiet. He's nervous but very hopeful." When she hung up, she was crying but smiling at the same time. The father came running when he heard her sobs. She looked at him, her face glowing through tears, and whispered, "They think it's him." That night the family couldn't eat or sleep. The younger brother paced the floor, imagining what his brother might look like now. The sister sat by the window, wondering if he would remember her. The father went out to the porch and sat under the stars, whispering words no one could hear. Inside, the mother packed a small bag just in case. She tucked inside the photograph, the old letters, and a scarf she had knitted for him years ago. The next morning, the family prepared for the journey back to the city. The road looked the same, but this time every mile felt filled with meaning. The mother held the bag tightly, afraid it might all be a dream. The father drove carefully, saying little but glancing at her often. At the radio station, they were greeted warmly. The producer smiled and said, "He's ready to meet you." But there was a caution in his tone, a gentleness as if reminding them that even happy endings could come slowly. "He's been through a lot," the producer added. "Please be patient." The family followed him down a hallway into a quiet room with soft lighting. The mother's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own breathing. The door opened slowly. The man standing inside looked uncertain. His clothes were simple, his hands rough from work. He had a faint scar near his temple. When he saw the family, he hesitated, as if afraid to believe what he was seeing. The mother's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the man spoke quietly. "The song," he said. "The one about the stars. Can you sing it again?" Her voice broke as she began to hum the old lullaby, the same one she had sung countless nights when he was small. The man's eyes filled with tears. He took a few slow steps forward. The father's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath catching. The younger siblings watched silently, tears streaming down their faces. By the time the mother finished the song, the man was crying too. He didn't remember everything, not yet, but something deep inside him recognized the warmth, the sound, the feeling. He whispered, I think I'm home." The mother ran to him and held him tightly, her sobs shaking her body. The father placed his hand on the man's shoulder, his eyes wet. The room filled with emotion so raw that even the radio staff watching from the doorway had to look away. Later they sat together for hours, talking softly. The man explained how he had woken up years ago after an accident with no memory. A kind stranger had helped him, and he had built a simple life near the coast, fixing broken radios. One day, while tuning a station, he had heard a song that reminded him of something long lost. That's when he decided to send his message to the radio, hoping someone might recognize it. The mother listened with tears streaming down her face, not because of what he said, but because he was there, alive, breathing, and speaking to her again. When the sun began to set, they left the station together. The road home felt shorter this time. The man sat in the back seat looking out the window at the fields and trees, whispering that everything looked familiar. The mother turned back often, smiling through tears. The father drove silently, his heart lighter than it had been in years. That night, when they reached home, the house that had once felt empty came alive again. The radio played softly in the background. The same static sound that had once been a reminder of loss now felt like music. The family sat together, no longer afraid of silence. For the first time in years, they laughed again. Real, unguarded laughter that filled every corner of the room. Outside, the stars shone brightly, as if the sky itself was celebrating. And somewhere between those stars and the quiet hum of the radio, the family's hope once lost had finally found its way back. The following days felt like a dream for the family. After so many years of searching, crying, and waiting, their lost son was finally home. The mother woke up each morning just to see his face and make sure he was real. The father, usually quiet and reserved, smiled more than anyone had seen in years. The younger siblings couldn't stop talking to him, asking questions about where he had been and what he remembered. But as beautiful as the reunion was, it wasn't simple. The man they welcomed home was not the same boy who had left years ago. There were moments when he looked around the house as if everything felt familiar but distant, like a memory half forgotten. Sometimes he stared at the walls, the old clock, or the family photos, trying to connect faces and moments that had faded from his mind. The mother noticed it the most, when she asked him about small things, the names of neighbors, his favorite childhood foods, or the old dog they used to have. He would pause, frown slightly, and then shake his head. "I'm sorry," he would say softly. "I wish I could remember." Her heart ached when he said that, but she never showed it. She simply smiled and replied, "It's all right, my son. What matters is that you're here now." He tried to fit back into his old life. Every morning he helped his father in the workshop, repairing tools and machines. The smell of oil and metal was strangely comforting to him. He said it made him feel calm, even if he didn't remember learning how to do it. The father often watched him silently, amazed that his hands still moved with the same skill they once did. In the evenings, the family gathered by the radio again. It had become more than just a source of sound. It was now part of their story, a reminder of how fate had reunited them. The mother sometimes played the same station where his message had been aired, and they would listen quietly. Once in a while, he would recognize a voice or a song, and a flicker of memory would cross his face. Those were the moments everyone held their breath, waiting to see if he would recall more. One night, as the family sat together, a soft song began to play on the radio. The melody was slow and nostalgic. The mother hummed along without realizing it. Suddenly the man looked up, eyes wide. "That song," he whispered. "I know it." The room went still. "I remember hearing it. In a small hospital. There was an old nurse who used to sing it while changing the radio station." The mother leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Do you remember where the hospital was?" she asked eagerly. He frowned, trying to think. "By the sea," he said slowly. "I remember the smell of salt. I used to go outside and watch the waves every evening." That was the first clear piece of his memory to return. The father nodded thoughtfully. "That must be the coastal town, the radio station mentioned," he said. "Maybe someone there knows more about what happened to you." The idea of returning to that town filled the family with both excitement and fear. They wanted answers, but they also didn't want to lose him again. Still, they knew that understanding the past was the only way to truly move forward. A week later, they decided to make the journey together. The morning was bright and peaceful when they set out. The man sat by the window watching the fields roll by, his face calm but thoughtful. The mother packed food and water, fussing over him as she used to when he was younger. The father drove steadily, his hands firm on the wheel. After several hours, the air began to smell faintly of the sea. The road turned narrower, lined with tall palm trees. When they reached the coastal town, it felt like stepping into another world. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the cries of seagulls. Fishermen were pulling their nets near the harbor, and children ran along the beach laughing. The man looked around, his expression changing. "I know this place," he whispered. "That street. I used to walk there." They parked near a small shop, and the mother held his hand tightly as they walked toward the road he had pointed to. It led to a modest hospital building with faded paint and a rusted gate. The sign above the entrance was barely readable, but he nodded when he saw it. "This is it," he said quietly. Inside, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and salt water. The nurse at the reception looked surprised to see them. The father explained who they were and asked if anyone remembered a man who had been brought there years ago after an accident. The nurse frowned, then disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, an elderly woman came out, her white hair tied neatly under a scarf. She looked closely at the man and gasped. "It's you," she said softly. "You're the one we found on the roadside years ago. Everyone thought you wouldn't survive, but you did." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Do you remember what happened to him?" she asked. The old nurse nodded slowly. "He was in bad shape when they brought him in. No ID, no phone, nothing. He woke up after weeks, but he didn't remember his name. We tried to find his family, but there were no records. So he stayed nearby after he recovered. He helped around the town, fixing radios and small machines. People liked him. They called him the quiet one." The family listened silently. It was hard to imagine their son living like that, alone with no memory, no one to call his own. The mother reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "You were never alone," she whispered. "We were looking for you all along," the nurse smiled warmly. "He used to talk about a dream," she said. "He said he saw a small yellow house and heard a woman singing. I suppose that was you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The man's eyes were wet and his voice broke when he said, "Thank you for taking care of me." The old nurse touched his shoulder kindly. "You have a strong family. You're very lucky." When they left the hospital, the air outside felt lighter. They walked toward the beach where the sun was beginning to set. The man stood near the water's edge, staring at the horizon. The waves touched his feet and he closed his eyes. "I used to come here every evening," he said softly. "I didn't know why, maybe. I was waiting to remember." The mother stood beside him, looking out at the same horizon. "Sometimes," she said gently, "the heart remembers what the mind forgets." As they watched the sunset, a sense of peace settled over them. The father, standing slightly behind, placed his arm around the mother's shoulders. The younger siblings collected seashells, their laughter mixing with the sound of the sea breeze. That night they stayed in a small guest house near the beach. Over dinner, the man shared small details that came back to him, flashes of faces, sounds, and smells. Some memories were clear, others were confusing, but each one felt like a step closer to home. Later, as they sat together under the stars, the radio played quietly from a corner of the room. The same station that had once connected them was now playing cheerful messages from listeners. The announcer mentioned a story about a family reunited after years apart, and though he didn't say their names, the family smiled at each other, knowing it was about them. The mother leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, whispering, "Who would have thought that the same radio that carried our tears would one day bring us back our happiness?" He nodded slowly. "Life has a strange way of giving back," he said. The man looked at them both, his heart full. He still didn't have all his memories, but he felt something even stronger, a sense of belonging. For years he had lived in silence, unsure of who he was. But now, surrounded by his family, the silence no longer scared him. It was filled with warmth and love. When they returned home the next day, the neighbors gathered to welcome them. Word had spread quickly through the town. People brought food, flowers, and congratulations. Some even said they had cried listening to the radio story. The mother thanked everyone with tears in her eyes. "It was hope," she said softly. "That's what kept us going. We never gave up, even when everything seemed lost." That night, the family sat together again in their small living room. The old radio hummed softly beside them. The air was calm, and the walls, once silent and heavy with sorrow, now felt alive again. The father turned to his son and said quietly, "You've come home." "That's all that matters now," the son nodded. "And I won't leave again," he said with a small smile. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of the sea, as if the world itself was whispering its approval. Inside, laughter and soft music filled the room, wrapping around them like a long-awaited embrace. And though the past still lingered in fragments, one thing was certain: their story of loss had become a story of finding, their pain transformed into hope. And in that hope, their family had been reborn. The days after their visit to the coastal town felt different. There was peace in the house again, but also a quiet sense of wonder. Every small thing, every sound, every familiar smell seemed to hold new meaning for them all. The family had found their lost son, and though his memory wasn't completely back, they were grateful for what they had. Life, which once felt gray and heavy, was filled again with color and laughter. The mother noticed that he spent more time near the window looking outside. Sometimes he smiled at the sight of children running along the street or at the old man who sold fruits from his cart every morning. Other times he seemed deep in thought, as if trying to connect the present to pieces of his forgotten past. The father would quietly watch him from across the room but never pushed him to talk. He knew that remembering was not something that could be forced. It had to come naturally, like the tide returning to the shore. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the mother found him sitting in the backyard, surrounded by old photo albums. She sat beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You found those in the cabinet?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, I wanted to see what I missed." They looked through the pages together. Birthdays, school plays, family trips, and little moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now felt precious. He pointed at one photo where he was standing with his father, both covered in dirt, holding a half-fixed bicycle. "I don't remember this," he said with a faint smile, "but I can feel what it was like. I can feel that we were happy." The mother smiled through tears. "You were always happiest when you were fixing something," she said. "You used to say that making broken things work again made you feel like a hero." He looked at her, eyes soft. "Maybe that's why I fixed radios all those years," he said. "I was trying to fix something inside me too." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out and touched his arm. "You did," she whispered. "You fixed our hearts." Later that night, the family sat together by the radio again. The same station that had once carried their message now played softly in the background. The announcer was talking about stories of miracles and unexpected reunions. The mother listened with a faint smile. The father, who was usually quiet during these moments, spoke up suddenly. "You know," he said, "we should thank them properly. The radio people. Without them, none of this would have happened." The idea stayed in everyone's mind. A few days later, they decided to visit the radio station again, this time not to ask for help but to say thank you. When they arrived, the staff welcomed them warmly. The producer who had first taken their call looked genuinely happy to see them. He listened as the father expressed his gratitude, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The mother handed him a small basket of homemade sweets. "It's not much," she said with a shy smile, "but it's from the heart." The producer was touched. "You know," he said, "your story gave so many people hope. We've received letters from listeners saying they cried when they heard about your reunion. You reminded everyone that miracles still happen." The man looked down, feeling shy under the kind words. "I still can't believe it," he said quietly. "For years I thought I was alone. I didn't even know who I was. And then one day a voice on the radio changed everything." The producer nodded. "Sometimes it only takes a voice. That's the power of connection." Before leaving, the producer asked if they would record a short message to share with listeners, a few words about what hope meant to them now. The family agreed. When it was the man's turn, he spoke simply, from the heart. "If anyone out there is missing someone," he said softly, "don't stop believing. Even when everything feels silent, the people who love you never give up. And somehow, in ways you can't explain, love finds its way back." When they returned home, the family felt lighter. That night, the radio played their recorded message. The whole neighborhood tuned in to listen. People called them to say how moved they were. For once, their story wasn't just their own. It belonged to everyone who had ever lost hope and found it again. In the days that followed, small signs of normal life began to return. The mother went back to gardening, humming as she worked. The father spent more time repairing old machines, his son often by his side. They didn't talk much while working, but the silence between them was peaceful, filled with understanding. Sometimes, while they worked together, the son would pause, his hand resting on a tool, and say something like, "I remember doing this before." Or, "You used to say something funny when we worked together." Each time the father would smile. "You're remembering," he'd say quietly, slowly but surely. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, the son found an old music box. It was dusty and missing a piece, but when he wound it, a faint melody played, a tune so familiar it made him freeze. He called out for his mother, and when she heard the music, she covered her mouth in surprise. "You made that for me," she whispered. "Before you left. You said you wanted me to have something that would always remind me of you." He stared at the box, tears filling his eyes. "I did?" he asked. She nodded. "You worked on it for weeks. You even cut your finger trying to fix the gears." He laughed softly through tears. "I guess some things never change. I'm still fixing broken things." From that day, small fragments of his memory began returning more often. He remembered the names of old friends, the streets he used to walk on, even the songs his sister loved to play on the radio. Every time he recalled something, the whole family celebrated like it was a festival. One evening, as the family sat outside under the stars, the son looked up and said, "It feels like I've been given another life." The father smiled faintly. "Maybe that's true," he said. "Sometimes life takes us away just so we can find our way back stronger." The mother placed her hand over her son's and said softly, "We've all been given another life. You brought it back with you." There was peace in their words, but also a deep sense of gratitude. They knew what it felt like to lose everything, and what it meant to find it again. A few weeks later, the radio station called once more. The producer said they wanted to air a follow-up episode about the family's story, how hope had not just reunited them, but healed them. At first, the family hesitated. They were simple people not used to attention. But then the mother said, "If our story can help even one family believe again, it's worth it." So they agreed. On the day of the broadcast, they all sat in their living room, listening as the announcer introduced their story. He spoke warmly, describing how a family's love had reached across years of silence to bring someone home. Then their recorded voices played, the father's calm, steady words, the mother's emotional message, and the son's quiet reflection about never giving up. The phone rang all evening after that broadcast. People from nearby towns called to thank them, to say they had been inspired, to share their own stories of loss and reunion. One woman said she had found her brother after hearing the program. Another said she had written to a family member she hadn't spoken to in years. The mother wept listening to those messages. "Maybe this was meant to happen," she said softly. "Maybe this was the reason we went through all of it." That night, after everyone went to bed, the mother sat by the radio once more. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the gentle static between songs. She looked at the small music box beside her, now shining clean after her son had fixed it. She wound it once, and the melody filled the room. The father walked in quietly, sitting beside her. "You're still awake?" he asked with a gentle smile. She nodded. "I was just thinking. For so many years I listened to this radio hoping to hear something from him, and now when I turn it on I hear his voice." The father took her hand. "That's how hope works," he said. "It starts as a whisper and ends up filling the whole room." Outside, the stars glittered over the quiet town. Inside, the family slept peacefully, their hearts finally free of the weight they had carried for so long. The radio, still playing softly in the background, seemed almost alive. Its hum no longer lonely but full of warmth, like a friend who had guided them through the darkest nights and finally brought them back into the light. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a gentle rhythm for the family. The radio still sat in its usual place on the shelf, polished and well kept, as if it were a living reminder of everything they had been through. Every evening someone would turn it on, not out of habit anymore but out of gratitude. It had become more than just an object. To them, it was a symbol of faith, of connection, of love that never gave up. The son had started working with his father at the small repair shop near the market. At first, people would come in just to see him, curious to meet the man whose story had touched the entire town. But soon they came for his skill too. He was good with his hands, patient and careful. Every time he fixed something, a radio, a clock, a broken fan, he smiled to himself. "One more thing that works again," he would say softly. His words carried more meaning than anyone else could understand. His memory was still not fully back, but it didn't bother him anymore. He said once while talking to his mother, "Maybe remembering everything isn't the point. Maybe it's about creating new memories that matter more." She had smiled and said, "That's what life really is, moving forward without forgetting what made you strong." One afternoon, as they closed the shop, the father found an old notebook on one of the shelves. It was filled with faded writing, notes, small sketches, and reminders in his son's handwriting from before he disappeared. "You used to write everything down," the father said, showing it to him. "Every dream, every plan, every thought." The son turned the pages slowly. His eyes softened when he saw a page where he had scribbled, "One day I'll build a radio that can reach people's hearts." He chuckled. "Looks like I did that in my own way," he said. That night, while sitting outside under the stars, he told his parents he wanted to build something new, something meaningful. "I want to make a radio show," he said. "A small one. Something where people can share messages, stories, or hopes, like what you did for me. Maybe it can help someone else find their way, too." The idea filled the family with pride. The father nodded immediately. "You've got our full support," he said. The mother's eyes glistened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Helping others the way we were helped, that's the best thing you can do." Over the next few weeks, he began setting up a small corner in the workshop. He gathered wires, old transmitters, microphones, and speakers. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. He named his project Echoes of Hope. Every evening he would go live for a short session, speaking gently to whoever was listening. Sometimes he read letters from people who wanted to share their stories. Other times he just played songs that lifted the heart. At first only a few people tuned in, but word spread quickly. Listeners began calling in, not just from their town but from nearby areas too. They sent messages of gratitude, prayers, and stories about their lives. Some shared how they missed someone far away. Others said they had reunited with loved ones after hearing his story on the main station. The family would often sit together while he broadcasted, listening quietly. The mother would smile every time she heard his calm voice over the radio, knowing that somewhere out there, someone was being comforted by those words, just like she had been comforted once. One evening, after finishing his broadcast, he received a message from an older man who lived in a neighboring town. The message said, "I lost my son during a flood years ago. I've searched everywhere, but no trace. Listening to your program gives me strength. Thank you for reminding me not to give up." The son read the message out loud and his voice trembled slightly. "He's just like us," he said quietly. The father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's help him too," he said. A week later, they invited the old man to their town. When he arrived, he brought a worn photograph of his missing son. The mother welcomed him warmly, offering tea and a seat by the window. The old man talked about his search, the sleepless nights, and how he had almost stopped believing until he heard the radio. As he spoke, the family listened closely. The father leaned forward and said, "You know, when we sent that message years ago, we didn't think anyone would hear it either. But miracles happen when you least expect them." The old man smiled through tears. "Then maybe my miracle is on the way too," he said softly. Before he left, the son promised to mention his story on his next broadcast. That night he spoke with emotion, sharing the old man's words and describing the missing son's photo. "If anyone knows anything," he said, "please reach out. Someone is waiting for him with open arms." Weeks went by. Then one evening, a letter arrived at the radio corner. It was from a man who said he might have seen someone matching the description, living in another coastal town. The family helped the old man travel there. A few days later, a phone call came. It was him crying with joy. He had found his son. The family gathered around the phone, tears streaming down their faces. "You helped me," the old man said, his voice breaking. "Your kindness gave me back what I lost." After the call ended, the mother sat in silence for a long time. Then she said softly, "Do you see? The same radio that brought our son home is now bringing hope to others. It's like it was meant to be." The son nodded. "It's not just a machine," he said. "It's a bridge between hearts." Months later, the story of Echoes of Hope spread even further. The small broadcast turned into a community movement. People started sending small donations and letters, asking to share their stories on air. The son became known for his gentle voice and his way of listening, really listening to people's pain and dreams. He never saw himself as special. Whenever someone thanked him, he simply said, "I'm just passing on the hope I was given." The family's life was calm but deeply fulfilling. They still had their struggles, money was tight, and some days were tiring, but they never lost their sense of purpose. Every problem seemed smaller compared to the gift they had received, the gift of being together again. One evening, as rain fell softly outside, the son found his mother sitting near the radio, lost in thought. "Are you listening to the old station again?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I like their stories, but I also like listening to yours," he smiled. "You always were my biggest listener." She looked at him, her eyes full of warmth. "You know," she said softly, "when you were gone, I used to talk to the radio. I would imagine you could hear me somehow. Now I really can." He sat beside her, resting his head on her shoulder. "You never stopped believing," he whispered. "That's why I found my way back." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the room filled with the soft light of a single lamp. The radio hummed quietly, playing a gentle tune, an old song about coming home after a long journey. The father entered the room, carrying a small wooden box. "Do you remember this?" he asked, setting it down. It was the same music box the son had fixed months earlier. He wound it slowly, and the melody filled the room once again. They sat together in silence, letting the music carry them back through the years, the pain, the waiting, the miracle that had changed their lives. After a while, the mother spoke. "Do you think we deserved all this? After everything?" The father squeezed her hand. "We didn't earn it," he said. "We just never gave up." "That's enough." The son looked at them both, his voice calm and sure. Maybe that's what hope really is. Not expecting miracles, but believing that love will find its way, no matter how long it takes. The mother smiled through tears. "You're right," she whispered. "It always does." The rain kept falling outside, but inside the air felt warm and full of peace. The radio played softly in the background, as if joining their conversation, its steady sound like a heartbeat reminding them that life, no matter how uncertain, was still beautiful. As the night deepened, the family stayed together, talking, remembering, laughing softly. The music box kept playing, the same melody that had carried them through so much. And somewhere, out beyond the rain and the airwaves, unseen and unheard, the echoes of their hope traveled on, carrying light to hearts that still waited, still searched and still believed, because sometimes all it takes is one message, one voice, or one small act of faith to turn silence into a song again.